They're causing chaos in lakes around the country, making them the most hated fish in America. Now, Asian carp are getting a major image makeover and may be coming to a kitchen near you.
Something is emptying the Illinois River. For decades, millions of invasive carp owned these waters, turning the basin into a boiling cauldron of jumping mussel. Predators couldn't touch them. Native fish were starved out. Then, almost overnight, the schools began to thin. The water went quiet. Locals whisper about giant gar returning to the depths. But the reality creeping up the riverbank isn't a predator with teeth. It's something far more calculated, and it never sleeps. The silent river. For nearly half a century, the Illinois River wasn't just a body of water. It was a battleground defined by absolute aquatic dominance. Silver carp and bighead carp didn't merely adapt to this ecosystem. They erased what was there before them and rebuilt it in their own chaotic image. If you took a boat out onto the water 5 years ago, you weren't navigating a river so much as you were plowing through a submerged powder keg. The high-pitched whine of an outboard motor didn't just disturb the surface. It triggered an explosion of hundreds of thousands of silver, muscular torpedoes launching themselves 6, 8, 10 feet into the air. These fish fractured bones, shattered windshields, knocked fishermen unconscious, and effectively took human beings off the water. Beneath the foam, the ecological destruction was even more absolute. Silver carp are filter-feeding vacuum cleaners. By stripping the water column of phytoplankton and zooplankton, they cut the legs out from under the entire aquatic food chain. Native gizzard shad, buffalo, and young bass were left to starve in the barren wake of a biological engine that seemed completely impossible to stop. By the time the invasion reached its peak, the sheer density of carp in the Illinois River was recorded as the highest of any freshwater system on planet Earth. Biologists watched in genuine horror as the biomass of these invasive species surged to account for upwards of 90% of the total living matter in certain stretches of the waterway. It was a closed loop of consumption and reproduction, an unstoppable biological wave surging north toward Lake Michigan. When a species achieves that level of absolute saturation, the rules of natural ecosystems break down. Nothing in North American waters was built to hunt a fish that grows to 40 pounds in a matter of months. Nothing could keep up with a female that releases millions of eggs in a single spawning event. The river had become a monoculture, a dense, swirling soup of invaders that swallowed every drop of nourishment the current had to offer. And then, the frequency of the jumps began to change. At first, the shift was subtle enough that only the river rats and long-time commercial haulers picked up on it. The sudden, violent eruptions of water behind passing motorboats grew scattered. Backwaters that used to boil with activity under the summer sun began to settle into an unfamiliar, glass-like calm. Long stretches of the upper river, places where the water once felt thick with the movement of unseen millions, started yielding empty sonar sweeps. Where did the biomass go? An aquatic population of that magnitude doesn't just evaporate. In the quiet reaches of the river, speculation filled the void. Rumors began to circulate along the banks that something deep within the ecosystem had finally snapped back, that some ancient, aggressive force had awakened to turn the hunters into the hunted. People pointed to reports of massive, prehistoric shadows moving through the murk, convinced that an apex predator had stepped up to tear through the invasive herds. Is the water simply hiding a new nightmare? The industrial trap. The monster hunting the Illinois River doesn't have fins, scales, or rows of needle-sharp teeth. It doesn't lurk in the mud waiting for nightfall. Nor does it strike from the shadows of submerged timber. The entity that is tearing through millions of pounds of carp, systematically gutting their numbers, and turning the river into a ghost town is an artificial creation. A cold, unyielding industrial gauntlet engineered by human hands, funded by state treasuries, and operated with absolute mathematical precision. What the river is witnessing isn't a natural biological counterstrike. It is a calculated, industrial-scale extermination campaign. For years, the general assumption was that invasive species, once established at such staggering densities, were effectively immortal. Nature had no answer for them, and traditional human efforts were nothing more than drops in a bucket. But when the threat of these fish reaching the multi-billion-dollar Great Lakes ecosystem became an immediate crisis, the approach shifted from basic containment to total war. The predator that emerged on the Illinois River isn't an animal. It's an interconnected web of steel nets, high-frequency sonar, commercial slaughter facilities, and continuous electrical bombardment. At the tip of this mechanical spear sits a fleet of commercial harvest vessels, operating not as independent fishermen looking for a catch, but as a coordinated task force. Outfitted with massive commercial seine nets stretching thousands of feet, these crews sweep the river's backwaters with surgical precision. They use specialized acoustic drive boats, vessels equipped with underwater speakers, blasting harsh, high-decibel frequency sweeps designed specifically to panic silver carp. Instead of waiting for the fish to swim into a trap, the boats drive the herds directly into waiting, impenetrable walls of mesh. A single sweep of these nets doesn't yield a few dozen fish. It pulls 50,000, 70,000, sometimes over 100,000 pounds of living tissue out of the water in a single afternoon. Year after year, without pause or seasonal reprieve, this extraction machine grinds on. Over 80 million pounds of Asian carp have been ripped from the Illinois River system. No living organism, regardless of its reproductive capacity, can withstand an apex predator that targets it with sonar mapping, GPS tracking, and industrial machinery capable of clearing entire river bends in hours. Further upstream, where the river narrows toward the urban canals of Chicago, the gauntlet becomes even more lethal. Here, the river itself has been weaponized through physics. Deep in the water column sits an array of steel electrodes pulsing massive charges of direct current electricity through the water column. Any fish attempt to swim through this invisible wall receives a rapid series of electric shocks that paralyze its nervous system, instantly halting its momentum and forcing it back downstream or stunning it until the current carries it into waiting capture nets. Complementing this electrical grid are experimental acoustic soundscapes and dense curtains of pressurized air bubbles. The soundscapes blast jarring, continuous machinery noises underwater, frequencies that trigger a severe panic response in the complex hearing structures of silver and bighead carp, while leaving native species relatively undisturbed. It is an invisible, acoustic fence stretching from the riverbed to the surface, creating an unbearable sensory overload that turns back entire schools before they can even reach the barrier gates. This isn't an ecosystem healing itself. This is an ecosystem being re-engineered into an automated trap. The carp aren't vanishing because they were outcompeted, and they aren't being eaten by a bigger fish. They are being ground down by a relentless, state-sponsored machine that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with a single objective: complete demographic collapse of the invader. Yet, pulling millions of pounds of flesh from the water is only half the battle. What happens when the slaughter becomes a business? The chemical wall and habitat collapse. While steel nets and high-voltage grids strip the adult population from the open channel, a far more insidious force is silently dismantling the species from the bottom of the food chain upward. Beyond the mechanical traps and harvest boats, the upper stretches of the Illinois River have been quietly transformed into a chemical and ecological wasteland that actively sabotages the life cycle of the invasive carp. An invasive species relies on predictable, hospitable conditions to sustain its hyper-explosive breeding cycles. Silver and bighead carp require specific environmental triggers to reproduce successfully: rising water temperatures, sustained flood pulses, and miles of uninterrupted free-flowing water where their floating eggs can remain suspended in the current for days while they drift and hatch. Human engineering has methodically dismantled every single one of these biological requirements along the Illinois River basin. Through a dense network of locks, dams, agricultural drainage systems, and industrial discharge points, humans have fundamentally altered the river's hydrology. What was once a dynamic, pulse-driven ecosystem has been throttled into a strictly controlled shipping canal. When heavy rainfall events occur, human operators manipulate the lock and dam gates to regulate water levels strictly for commercial barge traffic. This constant alteration of flow velocity destroys the steady, sustained currents needed to keep carp eggs suspended. If an egg falls out of the water column and settles into the thick, oxygen-deprived mud of the riverbed, it smothers and dies within hours. Thousands of potential spawning events, representing tens of millions of potential invaders, are quietly snuffed out in the silt before the fry ever break their shells. For the larvae that do manage to hatch against all odds, the environmental challenges only multiply exponentially. As they drift downstream into urbanized stretches, they hit an invisible wall of industrial and municipal chemistry. The upper Illinois River receives continuous, heavy runoff from vast agricultural fields, municipal wastewater treatment facilities, and heavy industrial corridors sprawling out from metropolitan areas. This creates a lethal cocktail of localized hypoxia, zones where dissolved oxygen drops to levels that fragile early-stage fish larvae simply cannot survive alongside elevated concentrations of heavy metals, urban petroleum runoff, pharmaceuticals, and synthetic surfactants. While adult carp are notoriously hardy and can endure harsh conditions that would kill sensitive native species, fragile larvae and juvenile fry possess no such immunity. The water column in these managed sectors acts as an automated biological filter, systematically wiping out entire generations of young carp long before they reach the size where they can leap from the surface, migrate upstream, or swim against the artificial currents. Furthermore, human intervention has intentionally squeezed the food supply at critical choke points along the river's path. By altering nutrient flows and controlling urban runoff through updated municipal water treatment infrastructure, the sheer volume of plankton in certain pools has dropped significantly compared to the peak invasion years. The silver carp that do manage to survive the chemical gauntlet are finding a river that is increasingly resource-starved. In many upper pools, fisheries biologists are discovering that remaining adult carp are structurally emaciated, lighter, thinner, and carrying significantly lower fat reserves than their predecessors from a decade ago. They are literally burning more calories navigating through disturbed, highly managed currents than they can consume from the depleted planktonic soup. They are being pushed past their physical limits by an environment that no longer supports their basic metabolic needs. This is ecological warfare waged on a molecular level. It isn't just that humans are physically removing the living adult fish with heavy machinery. We have re-engineered the very chemistry and fluid dynamics of the river so that the species cannot effectively rebuild its ranks. The ecosystem has been turned into a rigged game where the basic biological needs of the invader are continuously met with artificial barriers, toxic corridors, and engineered starvation. Can a species adapt when the very water it swims in is systematically programmed for its absolute failure? The market mechanism. Engineering solutions and chemical barriers cost millions of dollars, but the most lethal threat facing the invasive carp isn't a government grant, it's profit. When you turn a biological crisis into a commercial supply chain, you replace mere management with an economic engine that demands non-stop harvesting. For years, the sheer volume of carp pulled from the river presented a massive disposal problem. Millions of pounds of invasive flesh were buried in landfills or dumped into compost pits, an expensive, wasteful end to an endless harvest. But in recent years, state agencies and private industry cracked the code. They transformed the invasive carp from an unwanted pest into a high-throughput raw material. The first step was a massive PR campaign designed to overcome the public perception of the fish. In many Western markets, the word carp evokes images of bottom-feeding scavengers living in stagnant sludge. But silver and bighead carp are open-water filter feeders, consuming pure plankton, making their meat clean, lean, and high in omega-3 fatty acids. Illinois state officials launched a major rebranding effort, giving the species a clean, culinary name, Copic. By transforming invasive garbage fish into Copic, the market opened up overnight. Commercial processors began integrating the fish into school lunch programs, food banks, and upscale restaurants, pitching it as a sustainable, wild-caught protein that directly restores local ecosystems with every bite. Yet the human appetite for fish fillets is only a tiny slice of the economic machine. The real volume moves through industrial-scale processing facilities that don't care about market branding or consumer tastes. Rendering plants across the Midwest now process millions of pounds of carp into high-protein meal for aquaculture, pet food additives, and organic liquid fertilizers. The pet food industry in particular has developed an insatiable demand for novel protein sources turning wild-caught silver carp into premium treats and kibble toppers for dogs and cats across the nation. Internationally, processing plants have established direct export pipelines to markets in Asia and Europe, where freshwater carp remains a traditional staple. High-capacity processing facilities built along the Illinois River basin now freeze, pack, and ship tons of whole carp directly onto cargo vessels bound for overseas markets. This commercial monetization creates a self-sustaining loop. Commercial netters are no longer just collecting state subsidies. They are selling a sought-after commodity to processing plants operating on tight industrial schedules. When a boat can go out, fill its holds with tens of thousands of pounds of carp, and immediately unload at a processing facility for a guaranteed paycheck per pound, the economic pressure on the river becomes relentless. It is an extraction model mirrored after commercial oceanic fisheries, but with one critical difference. There are no quotas, no catch limits, and no closed seasons. The explicit goal of this fishery is total depopulation. Private enterprise, backed by global demand, has turned the Illinois River into an assembly line of extraction. The fish are no longer just an invasive species competing for survival. They are fuel, feed, and fertilizer, powering a multi-million-dollar industry. And yet, even the most efficient harvesting network can miss the quick, agile juveniles slipping through the nets, which is where an ancient native weapon comes back into play. Native alliances. While humans provide the brute force of mechanical nets, processing plants, and electronic grids, they do not work the shallow, tangled backwaters alone. To catch the swift, hidden generations that continually evade commercial netting, human operators have systematically mobilized a secondary biological front, a forced alliance with native predators that were once nearly wiped out themselves. For decades, apex native species like the alligator gar, flathead catfish, bowfin, and oversized blue catfish were treated as worthless trash fish by commercial operations and sport anglers alike. The alligator gar, a prehistoric titan featuring double rows of needle-sharp teeth and heavy armored ganoid scales, was systematically eradicated from Illinois waters by the mid-20th century through habitat destruction and targeted eradication. But as silver carp juveniles began clogging every tributary, side channel, and spawning creek along the basin, wildlife agencies realized they had accidentally cleared the board of the exact biological weapons needed to police the shallow nurseries. State stocking programs responded by aggressively reintroducing thousands of young alligator gar into the Illinois River basin, while simultaneously implementing strict protective limits on massive native flathead catfish. These aren't delicate species. They are cold, patient ambush predators built specifically to target fast-moving prey in murky, low-visibility water. While adult silver carp quickly grow far too large and heavy for a native fish to swallow whole, the millions of fingerlings and subadult carp crowding the backwaters represent an unlimited high-energy buffet for a growing gar or flathead. This creates a brutal, double-sided trap across the entire river system. Commercial netters, sonar drive boats, and high-tech acoustic barriers operate continuously in the main navigation channel, applying non-stop pressure to adult carp populations and driving them out of the deep, comfortable pools. Forced into the densely vegetated shallows and creek mouths to escape the human gauntlet, the panicking carp run directly into the waiting jaws of native hunters patrolling the weeds. The native predators don't need to eliminate the massive adult breeding stock. They simply need to strangle the recruitment rate. By feeding relentlessly on school after school of juvenile carp, gar, catfish, and bowfin, strip away the next generation before those young fish can ever mature, reproduce, or leap over a dam. Every juvenile swallowed in a backwater bayou is one less adult that state agencies have to chase down with miles of commercial netting. Above the waterline, avian predators have joined the exact same feeding frenzy. Massive flocks of American white pelicans, great blue herons, and double-crested cormorants now congregate in unprecedented numbers near lock and dam structures where young carp become disoriented by churned turbulence. The birds harvest thousands of pounds of juvenile carp daily, adding constant aerial pressure to the underwater ambush happening below the surface. What is happening along the Illinois River is not a spontaneous recovery of the pristine wild, nor is it a simple story of nature mysteriously healing itself. It is a strictly engineered, two-tiered suppression strategy. Humans handle the industrial macro-level removal of the heavy adult biomass, while re-established native predators handle the micro-level execution of the young. It is a forced ecological partnership where ancient biology meets modern wildlife management to squeeze an invasive species from both ends of its life cycle simultaneously. Even with native predators policing the shallow nurseries and commercial boats sweeping the main channel, the ultimate battleground remains the singular, heavily fortified bottleneck where the river meets the Great Lakes, the Brandon Road Fortress. If the lower stretches of the river are a moving slaughterhouse, the upper corridor at Joliet, Illinois, is something entirely different. A heavily fortified, high-tech choke point built to ensure no single carp ever reaches Lake Michigan. This is the Brandon Road Lock and Dam, the ultimate ground zero in the war against the invader, transformed into an engineered gauntlet where biology is systematically crushed by physics. For decades, the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal was an open gateway. It artificially connected the Mississippi River Basin to the Great Lakes, inviting invasive species to swim straight into a pristine, multi-billion-dollar freshwater ecosystem. To sever that aquatic highway without shutting down commercial barge traffic, engineers didn't build a static wall. They turned a locking structure into an active, multi-layered, defensive matrix. The site operates on a principle of absolute deterrence. Even if an invasive school manages to navigate hundreds of miles of commercial netting, chemical runoff, and native predators, it hits an impassable high-tech wall here. The first line of defense inside the fortress structure is a high-volume acoustic deterrence system. Arrays of specialized underwater speakers line the concrete walls of the approach channel, blasting continuous, custom-engineered sound waves directly into the water. These aren't random noises. They are high-decibel, high-frequency sound patterns crafted specifically to exploit the unique auditory anatomy of Asian carp. Because silver and bighead carp possess Weberian ossicles, a series of small bones connecting their swim bladder to their inner ear, they are exquisitely sensitive to waterborne sound vibrations. The soundscape hits them like a physical wall of noise, triggering an uncontrollable panic response that turns entire schools around miles before they can reach the lock chamber. Directly overlapping the acoustic array is a continuous air bubble curtain. High-pressure compressors pump massive volumes of air through perforated pipes embedded directly into the riverbed floor. This creates a dense, churning wall of rising bubbles stretching from the bottom of the channel to the surface. To a migrating carp, the bubble curtain represents an extreme disruption in water density and visual clarity, creating a disorienting, turbulent barrier that disincentivizes forward movement while simultaneously scouring fish away from the hulls of passing commercial barges. For any fish resilient enough to push past the sound field and the bubble wall, the fortress deploys its most lethal layer, a continuous electric dispersal barrier. Powered by high-output generators, giant steel electrodes embedded in the riverbed project a continuous electrical field directly through the entire water column. As a fish swims into the field, the electric current passes through its body. The sensation begins as a mild muscular unpleasantness, quickly intensifying into severe involuntary muscle spasms, paralysis, and complete loss of motor control as the fish nears the core of the grid. If a carp attempts to charge through, the current instantly incapacitates its nervous system, locking its muscles and letting the natural flow of the river float its limp body backward, away from the lock. The entire complex is backed by automated flush locks and engineered water currents. High-capacity pumps manipulate water velocity within the lock chamber itself, sweeping the channel with artificial downward jets that physically wash disoriented fish back down the river. Every single variable — sound, air, electricity, and fluid dynamics — is monitored in real time by automated control centers that adjust output based on water temperature, conductivity, and seasonal migration triggers. The Brandon Road Fortress represents the absolute pinnacle of human ecological engineering. It is not an ecosystem. It is a cold, mechanical checkpoint designed with zero margin for error. Here, the river is no longer a natural waterway, but a heavily instrumented security apparatus designed to enforce a single unyielding rule: nothing passes. With the northern door locked tight, the true scale of what we have done to this river system comes into sharp focus. The unintended mark. What began as an emergency response to a biological invasion has permanently rewritten the rules of river management across the North American continent. We did not merely suppress a nuisance species, we converted an entire river basin into an industrial, high-tech engine of extraction, chemical disruption, and total aquatic containment. The vanishing carp along the Illinois River are not the result of a sudden natural miracle, nor are they the victims of a hidden underwater predator rising from the riverbed depths. They are the calculated, measurable output of an artificial landscape. A river where high-voltage electric grids, jarring acoustic cannons, commercial slaughterhouses, and systematically reintroduced native hunters operate in total, cold synchronization. Humans looked at a runaway ecological crisis and answered it with absolute industrial force. Yet, turning a dynamic freshwater river into a heavily managed containment zone carries profound, lasting consequences for the future of wild ecosystems. To stop one invasive species from advancing, we built an environment so heavily manipulated, so saturated with acoustic noise, electrical currents, and physical barriers, that the natural flow of the waterway has been altered forever. The Illinois River is no longer a pristine wilderness. It is a hybrid ecosystem, part machine, part high-security checkpoint, part chemical gauntlet, and part commercial fishery. It stands as a stark, sobering monument to what happens when human engineering is pushed to its absolute limit to fix an environmental disaster of our own making. We may have won the immediate battle against the silver carp along the upper corridor, but the victory forced us to accept a heavy, permanent reality. Once we step in to play the role of the ultimate apex predator, we can never step back. The commercial nets cannot stop sweeping. The electric grids cannot go dark. The barrier pumps cannot fail. And the processing plants cannot cease their continuous grind. The exact moment human intervention falters or budgets dry up, the delicate balance we forcibly engineered begins to collapse, inviting the invasive biomass to surge right back through the cracks. When we decide to mobilize our capital, our technology, and our industry against a biological threat, we can grind down even the most unstoppable invasive population on planet Earth. But it also proves that the cost of that control is the permanent alteration of the environment itself. The carp didn't vanish into the terrifying jaws of a prehistoric river monster. They were systematically swallowed, processed, and contained by us and around the world. A global commodity. While North America treats the carp as an apocalyptic biological plague, across vast stretches of Europe and Asia, the narrative reverses completely. In those ecosystems, the fish isn't a biohazard to be erased. It is a cherished cultural cornerstone, a vital pillar of food security, and the foundation of multi-billion-dollar aquaculture industries. For thousands of years, civilizations across East Asia and Central Europe have revered carp. In China, bighead and silver carp are two of the revered 4 major domesticated fishes. They are cultivated in intricate polyculture pond systems where different species occupy distinct ecological niches, maximizing efficiency without depleting resources. Rather than an environmental enemy, carp are celebrated as an accessible, high-yield protein source that sustained populations through centuries of agricultural expansion. During major cultural holidays, fresh, whole carp isn't just food. It symbolizes abundance, perseverance, and good fortune. Across Central and Eastern Europe, the Eurasian carp holds a similarly sacred place at the dinner table. In countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, carp is the unquestioned star of the traditional Christmas Eve feast. Millions of live carp are transported to outdoor city markets each December, where families purchase them fresh for dinner. European carp farming is a regulated, environmentally integrated agricultural practice, with historic fish ponds in places like South Bohemia dating back to the Middle Ages, functioning as artificial wetlands that actively support local biodiversity. This global reality highlights a profound paradox. The exact same organism that North American wildlife managers brand as an invasive monster is treated elsewhere as a precious agricultural asset. The difference lies entirely in context and control. In their native habitats, Asian carp populations are constrained by natural river hydrology, native parasites, specialized local predators, and millennia of intensive human harvesting. In fact, due to river damming, overfishing, and pollution in their native Asian basins, wild populations of silver and bighead carp have actually faced severe declines, prompting conservation efforts and captive breeding programs to protect their genetic lines. When North American processing operations began shipping harvested Illinois River carp back to markets in Asia and Eastern Europe, they weren't just exporting cheap fish meal, they were tapping into deeply entrenched, historic culinary markets that actively value the fish. High-capacity processing plants along the Midwest corridor now freeze and pack whole carp, shipping them across the globe where consumers view wild-caught American silver carp as a premium, clean water delicacy compared to pond-raised domestic alternatives. The carp isn't inherently evil or toxic. It is simply an evolutionary marvel, a hyper-efficient biological machine that thrives wherever it is placed. In one hemisphere, it is an ancient food source cultivated with care. In the other, an industrial target hunted to near extinction. It isn't the fish that changed, but the world around it. Liked this video? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.